Hi guys, this is Drea from Aloha Plant Life. Hope you're having a great weekend. Today we're going to be potting up some water propagations that I've had going on, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about these two plants and methods of propagating them while we're doing it. The first plant we're looking at here is a string of turtles. It is also known as a Peperomia prostrata. It's got these cute little leaves that look like little turtle shells, hence the name string of turtles. And then we also have a salsa dancer hibiscus cutting. If you aren't familiar with a salsa dancer hibiscus, that is a trademark name for the grower that grows it. It is just a variegated type of hibiscus plant. So it actually gets, these leaves are pretty green, but you can kind of see some of the variegation here with some of the white coming in. It gets all kinds of white and green speckles, also a lot of pink on the growth. It's really a very, very beautiful plant. I'll do another video another time highlighting that plant in particular and kind of talking about my history with mine, because it was a very interesting way that I ended up with that plant, and it is one of my favorite plants. So one of the first things I want to talk about here is the soil mixture that I'm using, especially regarding the Peperomia prostrata. Peperomias in general are a little bit more succulent-like, so I really always want to include more drainage. However, they're not so succulent that you need a total succulent or cacti type soil. So what I use is a combination of an organic premium potting mix and then Jack's Gritty Mix. Jack's Gritty Mix is a mix specifically for cacti and succulents. I actually use Jack's Gritty Mix 100% by itself for my succulents, but for these peperomia, since like I said, they don't need that much drainage, they just need a little extra, I do about a 2/3 to 1/3 mix. So 1/3 of this is the Jack's Gritty Mix. I also think I might have sprinkled a little bit of pumice in here, even though you can't see it because I had a little bit left from another potting thing I did. So if you see a little bit of pumice in here when we're doing it, that's where that came from. So another thing regarding peperomias, they have a very, very shallow root structure. So as you can see, these are some tiny roots. Might be easier to see while it's in the water. There you can see, those are some tiny roots there, and that's normal. That's what those roots are gonna look like. So some people might look at this and think that's not ready to pot up. I'll tell you why I know it's ready to pot up. You see this second branch under the water here? That branch wasn't there when I started water propagating it. This branch grew once this got roots underwater that were strong enough to put out new growth. So this is putting out new growth underwater and on top. So that's how I know it's ready to pot up. But since those roots are so small and delicate, and because peperomias are very susceptible to root rot, you typically don't want to pot them up in anything too big. And to be honest with you, I only use 3-inch. This is a 3-inch pot here. And I will say this is not my usual 3-inch pots that I like to use. This one's really flimsy, but I was kind of in a pinch. I usually like the sturdier cups, kind of like this 4-inch one that we're going to use for our other propagation. But this is a 3-inch, and I will use these for the string of turtles. However, I would not use them for most other peperomias, especially the watermelon peperomia, any of the wrinkled peperomia varieties like Shumi Red or your frost peperomias, because it's really too big and you're running the risk of having some kind of rot happening. So for those other peperomias, and I'll do a video on potting those up and propagating them another time, I use little 2-inch pots. But I find the string of turtles will do okay in here. And there's another reason I want to use this size pot that I'll get into in a little bit. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to add some mix to this pot. Probably only about 1/3 of the way up, maybe half. And you're gonna wanna kind of press it down a little bit. Do be careful when you're potting things not to compact your soil too much. You don't wanna get it so tight that then your roots are starving for oxygen. So then we're gonna take our cutting here. And actually this vine wasn't a cutting. It actually just kind of fell off the plant. String of turtles are a little bit delicate, so sometimes when you're moving them around, you know, leaves will fall off. Or in this case, I think this branch might have gotten, or this vine, sorry, might have gotten stuck underneath the pot when I set it down and it broke it off when I moved it. Either way, if you ever have something break off like that, put it in water. It may not root, but it might. So why, waste it? Put it in water, see what happens. And same thing if these leaves fall off, and I'll get into this in a little bit later, you can use these and put them right in soil to propagate. So we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna use that little bit of stem that's already there below the roots to kind of stick it down in that soil to help kind of hold it while I start filling in. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna put a little bit more soil in here first. It's a little bit low. And some of these leaves are gonna end up under the soil. That's okay. It's no big deal. Like I said, leaves will propagate in the soil for these too. So they're not gonna, typically not gonna cause a problem. If you are worried about rot, well here, why don't we just do this? I'm gonna pull these off so I can show you what I was talking about propagating these. So we'll just set those there for now. Hold this kind of in the center of the pot. For those of you who don't know, I have a condition called essential tremors. I've talked about it in other videos that causes me to shake. That's why I'm shaking here. Unfortunately, certain things seem to trigger it more, and trying to do detail-oriented things, like with tiny little things like this, make it more difficult. So just bear with me here. You're just gonna backfill this all the way around. If you get some dirt up there, don't worry, when we water it, you can wash it off. Packing it in gently, not too tight. And you don't want to fill your pots up too much because you don't want to have the water running up over the sides of your pot whenever you go to water it. Okay, so I'm trying not to totally bury that new branch that's coming in. So that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna pack that in. So now real quick, I'm going to go wet this down under the sink over here. When you wet it down, any kind of propagations, try not to get them too wet. That's where rot starts to happen. I have a pull down sprayer on my kitchen sink. I turn the sprayer on and I barely turn the faucet on. I don't want high spray, just a weak spray. And I literally just give it like 3 to 4 real quick passes over it and then I stop. I don't want the water to be draining out the bottom. I do want the soil to be moist fairly throughout. This potting soil, I just took it out of the bag, so it's already a little bit moist. So we just don't want to overdo that moisture. So really I just try to get it right to where it's probably about to drip out the bottom and stop there. So I'll be right back. Okay, so now that we've watered that, one of the nice things, I'm just gonna say, we already have a vine kind of trailing out of here. That's one of the nice things about the water propagating is that you can have already the start of a vine going over your pot. Now, if you want like a nice big full plant like right away, do a lot of vines, stick a lot of them in here. But there are other ways to fill this out, and I'm gonna show you that now. So as I mentioned before, you can easily propagate these leaves. You just need to make sure that the tips of them, where they were attached, are stuck down into the soil. Now, not every leaf may take, that's fine. But right now I'm just gonna stick this one down here. We have another one in here. And ideally I probably should have cut these off. Didn't have my snips handy so that we could have kept a little bit more of that stem on the end. But you're gonna stick them in there and then eventually they will root. So that is what I'm gonna do over time with this. If I have leaves that are falling off when I'm moving my mama plant that this came from, when I'm moving it to water it or whatnot, if leaves fall off, I'm gonna keep sticking them in here. Now, another thing you can do is you can take a vine like this and instead of propagating it in water, you can actually spiral it around the top. You can use some bobby pins or cut some paper clips in half and pin it down and then just keep the soil moist on top and it will start to root. When I do that method, I will be honest with you, I typically only miss the top of it till about the top inch of soil is wet, and I don't worry about wetting the rest of the soil until I see that it's starting to put out new growth. Part of that reason, once again, goes back to rot. I don't want it rotting. It doesn't need to have soil down here wet because it's not even remotely trying to reach that part of the soil. So that's a little tip that I use. I just spray it in the morning, spray it in the evening, and I don't cover these. I never cover a peperomia propagation. They don't need that extra humidity. And in fact, by trapping in that humidity, you're increasing that chance of root rot with this particular plant. I'm gonna grab real quick one of my previous propagations that I did this way so that you can see what it's looking like now. I actually did break my rule with this one and used a 4-inch pot. because I was out of 3-inch and I was kind of worried that it might not make it, but it's actually doing really well. Give me 1 second to grab that. So here you can see the previous propagation I did. So you can see here's this one long vine that I propped up after water propagation, just like this one. And on top of that, I stuck some individual leaves in there. So you can see the ones here, here, here that look like they were just stuck in there as a leaf. Those are individual leaves. This one was an individual leaf. You can see this bit growing here. That's coming from that leaf. So that leaf has rooted. I also then pinned in, I'm trying to see if we can see any of the pins. I think there might be one hiding under there. It's really deep in there, but there's a little paper clip holding a part of a vine down there. So I ran like 2 or 3 more vines across the top, and you can see they're growing. There's a little new growth there. Here's some new growth coming off here. All of these little bitty leaves with the darker markings, those are all new leaves that have come out. This was one of the original vines here with those kind of more faded leaves, new growth there. So it's filling in. So that's how you're gonna get this to start looking more like a full plant. Now it is actually January 1st. Happy New Year's, guys. So we are not getting a lot of growth. This was originally propagated about, I think 3 months ago now. So it was putting out a bunch of new growth, but now that we're kind of in the winter, it's slowing down a bit. So come March, when the spring starts to come around, all of this is going to start growing out a lot more quickly. This is a fairly fast growing plant in my experience. And I will be honest, the mother plant actually is still putting out a ton of new growth and flowers right now. She had slowed down for a bit, and then last week she picked up again, but we have had the hottest December on record here in Texas, so maybe she got a little confused. But anyway, so if this is a good method, combination of methods to propagate your Peperomia prostrata string of turtles to get a nice full plant. So I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. Also, I will say I have a tendency to put these directly in a north-facing window. I am in North Texas, as I mentioned. I put them there so they're not getting too much light until they start to put out some more growth. And then I put them next to a southeast-facing window, but kind of off to the side, so they're getting indirect light. They don't want too much light in my experience. The mama plant's actually living directly in an east-facing window, and she's growing, like I said, she's been growing like crazy. But I do find that if you get them in too much sun, like direct southern sun, you're gonna start to get some burn on those leaves, so just be mindful of that. Okay, so moving on to our salsa dancer hibiscus. Because I still have some of this soil left, I'm gonna go ahead and use it for this. Typically, I wouldn't use the Jack's Gritty mix for this. I would probably just use a little perlite mixed in with this same organic premium potting soil. Once again, probably about a 1/3 perlite to 2/3 potting mix ratio, just because it is a plant that's developing roots. I don't want it drowning in soil. It needs to have some aeration. It needs to have some drainage. And I will say, I'm gonna go ahead and start loading this pot up. So once again, we're just gonna load it part way up, just depending on how we need the plant to sit in it. I will say that this salsa dancer hibiscus is actually the very first plant I ever tried to propagate. And unlike most people who start with water propagations, which tend to be a little bit easier, I went straight for soil. Took 5 cuttings that were a little bit thicker than this, and I will talk about the thinness and thickness of the cuttings for this plant and kind of what I've noticed with them in a second. But I took 5 cuttings, I put them all in one 6-inch pot. In hindsight, I probably would have done them individually, knowing what I now know, and all but one of them rotted. But that one took, and it's still growing. It's still pretty small. These do take a while to grow. I did start these propagations back in the summertime. In my experience, the soil propagations tend to root and start putting out new growth quicker than the water propagations, with one kind of exception, which I'll get into here shortly. So I want to go ahead and show you these roots. So you see these roots are much thicker and sturdy than those peperomia roots were. Those peperomia roots are really fine, and that's why I was saying you got to be careful with those peperomias because they'll get rotted really easy with that very delicate root structure. This is a much hardier root structure. And a lot of people would look at this and say, oh, that's not enough roots to be potting it up. I disagree. As I said, this plant tends to start putting out new growth and propagate better in soil to begin with. So I find that you don't need to wait till those roots are crazy long. At this point, it's wanting to put out roots. You put it in soil, it's just going to encourage it and help it to put out more roots because it's got nutrients in that soil. If you do see these little crystals on here, what this is, I use rooting hormone. So when I cut this off the plant, I dipped it in rooting hormone, I stuck it in the water. If you have worked with rooting hormone before, what you'll notice is over time, it'll start to develop these crystals. I do not know exactly why that is, what's causing it. All I know is that's what you want to see. The more of these that you see, the closer you are to actually seeing roots start to come out. So this took forever. This took like, I think 4.5 months in water for this to start to put out these roots, versus it only took about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks maybe, or sorry, let me back that up, 3 months, 3.5 months, when I was doing it directly into soil for me to start to see new growth coming out of the top. So that's what I was saying about soil tends to go better. So I typically just wait till I start to see the little offshoot roots here off of the main root. Once I start seeing that, as long as this is about 1 to 2 inches long, then I'm gonna pot it up. And you can see this is a relatively thin cutting. I'm gonna get into that in a second, but first let's go ahead and get this in here. So you just kind of need to swirl those roots to the side. Be careful not to break them. This is about the level I want this plant to be in this pot. So I'm gonna go ahead and start backfilling it in here. And this plant's a little bit easier for me to hold in place. It's not quite as small and delicate as that peperomia was. And once again, this is a 4-inch pot. I do use 4-inch pots for all of my woodier cuttings from woodier plants like this. So if I was doing like a petrocroton propagation or a zebra plant, anything that's got that woodier stem, I'm gonna put in a 4-inch pot because typically it's gonna start putting out those roots pretty quickly, and they are bigger, hardier roots. As I mentioned, sorry, I kind of jarred the camera there. Just gonna dump the rest of this in here and then kind of spread it around. It should be, wow guys, that's like the first time I think I've ever like perfectly measured out the amount of soil I need. Normally I have like leftover that I'm having to like Tupperware up and save for later, but that kind of worked out perfectly. Okay, so we're all potted up here now. And of course there's a fungus gnat flying around that water over there. And I'm gonna do the same thing here that I did with the other one. I'm gonna take it over the sink. Just gonna give it a few quick passes with the sprayer on and not too high, just enough to get it, you know, wet through, but not dripping. So I'll be right back. All right, so some of you are probably thinking it's winter. What the heck is she doing? Propagating things in winter or potting things up in winter. I'll tell you right now, I don't necessarily feel like it's, with a lot of plants, that it matters if you do it in winter. I do think it might take longer sometimes for your roots to develop and whatnot, but there's no reason for me to leave this in water where it's potentially gonna get too used to the water to the point that when you try to put it in soil, it's gonna struggle, right? And for some plants, that's not as big of an issue. Probably this one maybe not as big as, say, for example, pothos. Pothos and philodendron can actually grow in water. So if you put them in water and you're leaving them in your water for too long, they'll get used to it and then they won't be able to transfer to the soil. You'll have to kind of leave them in your water the entire time. So one thing I wanted to talk about with these propagations for plants like this. So you can see this plant has red stems, or kind of a pinkish stem for its new growth. Typically, if you research online, people say you need to take new growth cuttings from these for soil or for water. It says to avoid the stems that are more barky, that have turned into that brown color. I'm gonna tell you right now, I actually tried just to see what would happen, and let me show it to you. That was woodier. So you can see, hopefully, how thick that is, and that it's that brown color, and then you can see up here is where the reddish pinkish starts, right? And I dipped it in rooting hormone and I stuck it in here just to see what would happen. And in case you can't see, let me see if I can rotate. There's a root there. There's a root starting. And I'm telling you, that is the fastest. And I have done a lot of propagations off of this salsa dancer hibiscus. This is the fastest I've ever had a root develop in water. At the same time, I took another cutting that was a little bit less woody than this, but definitely woodier than this one. And it's sitting over on top of my kitchen sink right now, and it looks like it's about to start getting a new root too. That's way faster than this one took. So I've learned, well, I think we all know, don't always trust what you read online, but I've learned that actually woodier can be better. And I've actually now had some people tell me that they've had better success using woodier stems going directly into the soil for propagation with this plant as well. But what I think is most important here is either way works. You can propagate any kind of cutting off of this plant as long as it has a node down below that you're cutting right below that node. As long as you're using rooting hormone, I think that's a must for this plant. And then you're just gonna make sure you're leaving just those top leaves. And if you'll notice here, you can see that these leaves have been cut. Those leaves are really big. When I put them in the water, they started to wilt. A good way to combat that is just to cut them in half, so it's not as much foliage that the plant's trying to still support. So, you know, these are the kind of things that sometimes you just have to mess around with and experiment to see what works best. But I kind of made a promise, and once again, I'll give a spotlight video on this particular plant at another time. But because of my history with this plant, I kind of made a promise to her that I will never not use something I cut off of her. So everything I cut off of her, I try to propagate. And so far, I've been pretty good at it. That first go around where I had the 5 and I lost the 4 to rot or may have been mold. That's only happened to me a couple more times. I've only lost 3 other cuttings that I took off of her. And it just took me a while to figure it out, because one of the other things we're gonna do right now is we're gonna cover this, because these do need to be covered. They want humidity, high humidity. And when you do cover them, this is another reason why you don't wanna get your soil too wet. You're gonna be trapping in all that moisture, and too much moisture can lead to mold. So usually if you get mold, what it'll look like, starts out as a white kind of fuzz around the edges of your stem, typically around nodes. And then sometimes you can get it actually in the soil. It's important to keep an eye on it for the first, week or so to make sure that you're not seeing too much moisture. The other thing is, maybe this isn't too wet, but if you put it somewhere that's too hot or getting too much direct sun, that's going to increase the amount of moisture in there and can lead to mold and rot as well. So you want to make sure you have it in a good place. Once again, I typically will put these in a north-facing window. There's not too much light in that situation. I do then later on, when they start to put out growth, move them to that same southeast facing window off to the side, like I mentioned with the Peperomia prostrata, and I let them continue to grow there. I do also sometimes cut notches, and I will show you that right now. I'm gonna grab our cover for this. So all we're using here is just a quart-sized Ziploc bag. The nice thing about this, and I don't have a marker right now, but normally what I will do is I will write the date on this, that I potted this up. And you can see here, I've used this for one before that was able to be uncovered now. I always reuse my bags. I do clean them out on the inside just in case there's any kind of bacteria lingering, but I've cut the corners off so that it gets a little bit more airflow, but it will still provide the humidity that the plant needs. So you just want to very carefully, and some people do this the other way. They'll put it in the bag with the bottom of the pot here, and then they'll actually seal it on the top. These plants they don't like to have their leaves touching too much, so it's touching a little bit right now. It's not that big of a deal. I found that I haven't had any leaves rot because of that. You can use chopsticks or just any kind of sticks to put in there to kind of spread it out if you're worried about that, but typically I have had no problem doing it this way. If you do find that you're still getting a little too much moisture in there and you're worried about mold, you can uncover it periodically throughout the day. But just be mindful, because this plant will tell you when it's mad because it doesn't have enough humidity. It will start to wilt really, really fast. And I will say, even that very first cutting that I did, that was successful of the 5, I still have it covered. I tried to uncover it, and a couple of times the plant would wilt. And then one day we got to where I uncovered it and the plant didn't wilt. And I left it uncovered, but it stopped putting out new growth. So I left it that way for almost a month, and the plant was alive, but it wasn't putting out any more new growth. We were still in the summer, so it should have been putting out new growth. So I decided I'm just gonna try and cover it again. And the second I covered it again, 2 days later, 3 new leaves. It had started putting out 3 new leaves. So this is a very high humidity plant. It's gonna need to be covered for a while. If you have a greenhouse or a greenhouse cabinet, that is even easier. You just stick them all in there and everything will be good. From a humidity standpoint, just make sure that you're getting proper airflow through there with a little fan or whatnot as well, because rot and mold can still be an issue in that kind of setting. So that's basically it, guys. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you for joining me. Once again, I'm Drea from Aloha Plant Life, and I'll be seeing you again soon.